My name is Bonnie, 57 years old, and I gave everything for my son Thomas. 25 years of sacrifice, love, and putting his needs above my own. His wedding day should have been one of my proudest moments. Instead, I sat alone at a back table served cold leftovers, while everyone else enjoyed a gourmet meal. When Thomas saw, he laughed and told his new wife, "She is used to eating what life leaves behind." The wealthy guests laughed. No one even noticed when I left. Before I tell you what happened the morning after the wedding, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when everyone expected you to just take the scraps. I became a single mother when Thomas was just 3 years old. His father, Richard, decided family life was too constraining for his ambitions and left us with little more than a note on the kitchen counter and $200 in cash. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later by certified mail. No discussion, no negotiation, just a clean break that left a very messy reality for me to handle. I had no college degree, limited work experience, and suddenly complete responsibility for a toddler who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. The first year was the hardest. I moved us from our modest but comfortable suburban house to a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. I slept on a pull-out couch in the living room so Thomas could have the bedroom. Our daily routine was a carefully choreographed dance of childcare and work shifts. I would wake at 5:30, get Thomas ready, and drop him at an early morning daycare program by 6:45. Then I would rush to the local diner where I waitressed the morning shift until 2 in the afternoon. After picking Thomas up, I would take him to my sister's apartment while I worked as an administrative assistant at a local insurance office until 7. On weekends, I attended night classes at the community college, hoping to eventually earn a degree that might lead to better opportunities. My sister Margaret would watch Thomas during those precious hours I spent in classrooms, trying to absorb information while fighting exhaustion. "You need to take care of yourself too, Bonnie," Margaret would tell me. "You cannot pour from an empty cup." But my cup remained nearly empty for years as I poured everything into raising Thomas. When he was 8, I learned about a public school in a better district that had an excellent academic program. The catch was that we needed to live within the district boundaries, which meant higher rent for less space. I took on a third job doing medical billing from home after Thomas went to bed, working until my eyes burned from staring at the computer screen. We moved into a tiny apartment in the better district, and Thomas thrived in the new school environment. His teachers praised his intelligence and work ethic. I would beam with pride at parent-teacher conferences, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten when they described his potential. Food was often tight in our household budget. I learned to stretch ingredients in ways that would have impressed Depression-era housewives. Rice became the foundation of countless meals, dressed up with whatever protein was on sale that week. I developed anemia from skipping meals when our food budget ran short, always ensuring Thomas had enough to eat. "Aren't you having dinner, Mom?" he would sometimes ask when I claimed I had eaten earlier. I had a big lunch at work. I would lie, ignoring the gnawing emptiness in my stomach. Clothes came from thrift stores for me, but I scraped together enough for Thomas to have at least a few name-brand items, so he wouldn't face the cruel teasing children can inflict. My winter coat lasted 12 years, patched and repatched until the original fabric was barely visible. Meanwhile, Thomas got a new coat each year as he grew and proper shoes for his quickly expanding feet. Despite our financial struggles, I tried to give Thomas as normal a childhood as possible. When he wanted to join the soccer team, I found a way to afford the fees and equipment. I never missed a game, arranging shifts around his schedule and running on even less sleep. I would sit on the sidelines, cheering until I was hoarse, my heart swelling with pride at each of his accomplishments. High school brought new challenges. Thomas excelled academically and athletically, joining both the debate team and track team. His track coach suggested he had potential for a college scholarship if he continued to improve. I worked overtime for months to pay for a summer track camp that could help him develop his skills. The investment paid off. Thomas was offered a partial athletics scholarship to Westridge University, a prestigious school known for both its academics and track program. The scholarship covered about 40% of the tuition and fees, which was a blessing, but still left a substantial amount that we couldn't afford. "I can go to state instead," Thomas offered when we discussed the finances. "The scholarship there covers everything." "No," I insisted. "Westridge will open doors that state never could. We will find a way." That way involved taking out loans in my name, depleting what little savings I had managed to accumulate, and picking up even more hours at work. By then I had finally earned my associate's degree and found a better-paying administrative job, but the cost of an elite university stretched our finances beyond the breaking point. My health began to suffer from the years of overwork and stress. Chronic back pain from years of waitressing became a constant companion. I developed migraines and digestive issues that doctors attributed to stress. But I pushed through, determined to give Thomas the opportunities I never had. His graduation from Westridge was one of the proudest days of my life. Watching him accept his diploma in business administration, I felt that every sacrifice had been worth it. He had job offers before graduation and accepted a position at a prestigious financial firm in the city. "I am going to take care of you now, Mom," he promised after the ceremony. "No more killing yourself with work." For a while it seemed like he meant it. Thomas sent money every month to help with the bills. He called regularly and visited on holidays. But as he rose through the ranks at his firm, something began to change. The calls became less frequent, the visits shorter, and often cancelled last minute due to work commitments. "You understand how important these networking events are, right, Mum?" he would say. "Making the right connections is everything in finance." I did understand. I had sacrificed everything to give him these opportunities. But I couldn't ignore the way he had started to reference his childhood with a hint of embarrassment, as if our struggle was something shameful rather than a testament to perseverance. Then Thomas met Eliza Whitmore at a charity gala. She came from old money, her family's wealth stretching back generations. Their home was featured in architectural magazines, and their vacations made the society pages. Thomas was immediately smitten, not just with Eliza, but with the world she represented. The first time he brought her to meet me, I noticed how he tensed at the sight of my modest apartment, how he quickly explained away family photos showing our humble past. Eliza was polite, but distant, her designer clothes and perfect manicure creating an invisible barrier between us. After they left, I cried for the first time in years. Something had shifted, and I feared I was losing the son I had sacrificed everything for, not to a career or distance, but to shame over his own origins. Thomas and Eliza's engagement was announced at the Whitmore family's country club during a lavish dinner I wasn't invited to. I learned about it through a text message with a photo of the ring, a diamond so large it looked uncomfortable on Eliza's slender finger. "We are engaged, big plans to make. We'll call soon with details." The call never came. Instead, I received a formal invitation to an engagement party at the Whitmore estate, an imposing colonial mansion set on 5 acres of manicured grounds. I spent a week's salary on a new dress for the occasion, determined to make a good impression despite my nerves. The valet looked skeptical when I pulled up in my 15-year-old Honda, hesitating before taking my keys, as if the car might disintegrate at his touch. Inside, I was immediately overwhelmed by the opulence. Crystal chandeliers, original artwork staff in formal attire, carrying silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. "Mom, you made it," Thomas said when he finally spotted me hovering near the entrance. His greeting was warm, but brief, before he was pulled away by Eliza to meet important family friends. My first interaction with the Whitmores set the tone for everything that followed. Eliza's mother Caroline approached with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "So wonderful to finally meet Thomas's mother," she said, her gaze flickering over my outfit. "He has been quite the addition to our social circle. Such ambition." "Thomas has always been determined," I replied. "I am very proud of him." "Yes, well, he has certainly overcome his background limitations," she said with a little laugh. "Eliza has been helping him navigate the finer points of our world. We all have such high hopes for him. Our world." The distinction was clear. I didn't belong in this realm of old money and social connections. I was merely the woman who had produced their daughter's ambitious fiancé. When wedding planning began, I initially thought I would be involved. I had dreamed of helping plan my only child's wedding since he was small. I had even set aside a modest amount each month for years, accumulating almost $8,000 I hoped would contribute meaningfully to their day. At our first planning lunch, I brought a scrapbook of ideas I had collected. Caroline Whitmore glanced at it briefly before setting it aside. "How quaint," she said. "But we have already engaged the top wedding planner in the city. Eliza has very specific ideas about the aesthetic." The wedding budget they discussed casually over salads exceeded $80,000. My contribution would barely cover the flowers. "I could help with some DIY elements," I offered hesitantly. "I'm quite good at handcrafting. Perhaps the favors or centerpieces." "Oh, that won't be necessary," Eliza said quickly. "Everything is being custom designed to match our theme." Very specialized. Thomas sat silently, offering no support. When I caught his eye, he gave a small shrug, as if to say, "Just go with it." Each wedding planning event followed the same pattern. I would be invited as a courtesy, my input politely acknowledged, then promptly disregarded. The bridal shower was planned without any consultation, though I was expected to attend with an appropriately expensive gift. At the shower held in a private room at an exclusive women's club, I overheard Eliza talking to her bridesmaids in the bathroom. "Thomas's mother is sweet, but so lacking in refinement," she said with a sigh. "I am trying to include her, but she simply doesn't understand our standards. Thomas is embarrassed by her, though he would never admit it." I stood frozen in the stall, tears threatening. The worst part wasn't Eliza's words, but knowing there must be some truth to them. Thomas had been pulling away, treating me more like an obligation than a beloved parent. "Just go with the flow, Mum," Thomas told me when I tried to discuss my concerns. "The Whitmores know how these things are done in their circles. It is easier if we let them handle it." Their circles. Just like that, he had aligned himself with them, leaving me on the outside. As the wedding approached, I received a text about what to wear. The mothers are wearing floor-length gowns in muted tones, nothing too bold or bright. Attached was a link to a designer's collection with dresses starting at $3,000. I had exactly one option. My mother had left me her engagement ring, a modest but lovely diamond in a vintage setting. I had kept it all these years, through every financial hardship, intending to give it to Thomas for his future bride. But Eliza already had a ring that cost more than my car. So I sold the heirloom to buy a suitable dress, swallowing my sentimentality in the name of not embarrassing my son. The rehearsal dinner hosted by the Whitmores, despite tradition dictating it should be the groom's family's responsibility, was held at an upscale restaurant. I was seated at a table far from the main party with distant Whitmore relatives who spoke amongst themselves about vacation homes and boarding schools. Thomas gave a speech thanking the Whitmores for their generosity and welcoming him into their family. He mentioned his colleagues who had become mentors, his future father-in-law's connections that had helped his career. He did not mention me at all. That night alone in my economical hotel room, I cried until no tears remained, but I was determined to maintain my dignity through the wedding day. I would smile and be gracious, no matter how much it hurt. This was Thomas's day after all, and I had spent a lifetime putting his happiness first. The morning of the wedding, I prepared alone, while scrolling through social media posts showing Eliza's elaborate preparation, professional hair and makeup artists, a champagne breakfast with her 6 bridesmaids photographers, documenting every moment. Meanwhile, I applied my own makeup with shaking hands, fighting anxiety about the day ahead. When I arrived at the country club venue, I wasn't sure where to go. None of the elegant signs directed the mother of the groom. After wandering for several minutes, a staff member approached. "Are you with the wedding party, ma'am?" he asked, his tone suggesting I looked out of place despite my expensive dress. "I am the groom's mother," I replied. "Ah," he said. "You can enter through the side entrance there. The main hall is quite crowded with the photographer's equipment." I followed his directions, entering through what appeared to be a service corridor, emerging into the ceremony space just as guests were being seated. No one had saved me a place in the front row. A rushed usher found me a seat on the groom's side, third row, back next to a couple I didn't recognize. Throughout the beautiful ceremony, I fought back tears for all the wrong reasons. Thomas barely glanced my way when he took his position at the altar. After the vows, when he kissed his bride and turned to face the guests, his eyes skimmed right over me as he beamed at the crowd. The cocktail hour that followed was lonely, despite the crowded room. Guests clustered in groups of shared history and social connections. Whenever I approached a conversation, it would politely but quickly shift in tone, becoming more general and less engaging until I drifted away again. For the reception, I discovered I had been seated at what could only be described as the miscellaneous table. An elderly great-aunt of Eliza's, who was slightly deaf, a couple who worked with Thomas but weren't close friends, the wedding planner's assistant. We were positioned far from the head table, partially obscured by a large floral arrangement. I watched as servers brought out the first course to the head table, then methodically worked their way through the room. Our table was clearly last in the serving order. By the time they reached us, the bride and groom had finished their appetizers, and the main course was being served to the priority tables. The pattern continued with the main course, a beef tenderloin with truffle risotto that smelled divine as it was carried past our table to others. I waited patiently, making small talk with the great-aunt, who could barely hear me. One by one, the other tables were served guests, cutting into perfectly cooked beef and savoring the first bites. When over half an hour had passed and our table remained empty, I finally caught the eye of a passing server. "Excuse me," I said quietly, not wanting to cause a scene. "I believe our table has been overlooked for the main course." The young man's face fell. "I am so sorry, ma'am. There was a count issue in the kitchen. We are short on the tenderloin. The chef is preparing an alternative. It should be out shortly." 20 minutes later, plates finally arrived at our table. But instead of the tenderloin everyone else had enjoyed, we received what were clearly hastily assembled leftovers. My plate contained sliced beef that was stone cold and grey, in the center risotto that had dried out under heat lamps, and vegetables that had wilted to an unappetizing mush. I stared at the plate, fighting the humiliation that threatened to overwhelm me. The elderly aunt prodded her food with obvious disappointment. The other guests at our table exchanged awkward glances, but began eating without complaint. I had just taken a bite of the cold meat when I noticed Thomas approaching from the head table. For a moment, my heart lifted. Perhaps he had noticed the discrepancy in service and was coming to rectify the situation. Instead, he stopped beside me, Eliza at his side, and looked down at my plate with a smirk. "Looks like you got the short end of the serving stick, Mum," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "It is fine," I said softly. "Just a small mix-up in the kitchen." "Do not worry about her," Thomas said to Eliza, with a laugh that cut through me like a knife. "She is used to eating what life leaves behind." Eliza giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. A ripple of laughter spread from nearby tables, where guests had overheard. Caroline Whitmore, seated nearby, made no attempt to hide her amused smile. In that moment, something broke inside me. Not just my heart for the son I had raised, but the chains of sacrifice that had bound me to his approval for decades. I felt my face flush with heat, but I maintained my composure, cutting another piece of cold meat. "The food is lovely," I said, my voice steady despite the lie. "You two should get back to your guests." They returned to the head table, already forgetting the moment that was searing itself into my memory. I forced myself to take a few more bites, then quietly placed my napkin beside my plate. No one noticed as I slipped away during the best man's speech, not even the others at my forgotten table. I walked through the service corridor I had entered through, past staff members who barely glanced my way, out into the cool evening air. In my hotel room, I removed the expensive dress that had cost me my mother's ring, but hadn't protected me from humiliation. I hung it carefully in the closet, though I knew I would never wear it again. Then I sat on the edge of the bed in my slip, and for the first time since Thomas was a child, I allowed myself to cry without restraint. Not delicate tears of sentiment, but deep body-shaking sobs of grief for the son I had raised and somehow lost along the way. I woke the next morning with swollen eyes and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The hurt remained a throbbing wound in my chest, but something else had awakened as well, a sense of purpose, a determination not to let this pattern continue. Sitting at the small desk in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and began to research. First, I logged into my banking accounts, reviewing the education fund I had started when Thomas was born. Even during the leanest times, I had managed to put a little aside each month, initially hoping it would help with college before his scholarship. When that wasn't needed, I had continued adding to it, envisioning it as a nest egg for his future children's education. The account now held just over $72,000. A lifetime of small sacrifices accumulated into a significant sum. There was also my retirement account, modest but growing, and the small house I had finally been able to purchase 10 years ago, when Thomas was in college. I had bought it with the hope that he would visit often, keeping his old room ready, even though he rarely stayed there. I made a list of all the financial support I had provided over the years. Tuition contributions, the down payment for his first car, the security deposit on his first apartment, the money I sent monthly during the early years of his career when he was building his professional wardrobe. All told, it was far more than I had realized, especially when calculated with interest. Next, I called my sister Margaret. "Bonnie, how was the wedding?" she asked, her voice warm. Margaret had been invited but couldn't attend due to her husband's health issues. A blessing in disguise, as she would have been seated at the miscellaneous table with me witnessing my humiliation. "It was revealing," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "Margaret, I need your advice." I explained what had happened, my voice breaking only once when recounting Thomas's cruel comment. Margaret's outrage was immediate and validating. "That ungrateful little—" She stopped herself. "Bonnie, do you remember what Mom used to tell us? Your dignity is not for sale, not for any price, and certainly not for scraps of affection." Our mother had been a wise woman who raised us alone after our father died. She had taught us the value of self-respect, even in difficult circumstances. Somehow, in my determination to give Thomas everything, I had forgotten that essential lesson. "What should I do?" I asked. "What do you want to do?" Margaret countered. "For once in your life, Bonnie, what do you want? Not for Thomas, not for anyone else, for yourself." The question stunned me. I had spent so long considering only Thomas's needs and wants that my own had become nearly invisible to me. But now, with startling clarity, I knew. "I want to stop being taken for granted," I said. "I want consequences for his behavior. I want my dignity back." "Then take it back," Margaret said simply. After our call, I emailed my attorney requesting an urgent meeting first thing Monday morning. Then I drafted a letter to Thomas, pouring out decades of love, sacrifice, and hurt. I wrote about my hopes for him, my pride in his accomplishments, and my profound disappointment in the man he had become. I explained the changes I intended to make to my will and accounts, not as a threat, but as a natural consequence of his choices. For the first time in decades, I fell asleep thinking about my own future rather than Thomas's. There was a strange peace in that, like setting down a heavy burden I had carried for so long. I had forgotten it wasn't part of my body. Monday morning, I met with my attorney, Harold Goldman, who had handled my modest legal affairs for years. "Bonnie, are you certain about this?" he asked after I explained what I wanted to do. "Emotions after family events can run high. Perhaps give it some time to cool down." "I have given it 25 years, I replied calmly. "I am certain." We spent the morning executing the necessary documents. Thomas was removed as beneficiary from my accounts and insurance policies. The education fund was transferred to a newly established foundation for single mothers pursuing education. I signed paperwork to list my house for sale, with instructions to find a buyer quickly. By noon, it was done. I felt lighter than I had in years, despite the lingering sadness. Harold provided me with copies of all the documents in a manila envelope, which I placed carefully in my handbag. "There is one more thing," I said before leaving his office. "I want to give Thomas a chance to understand why I have done this. Would you call and ask if he and Eliza would meet me privately?" Harold made the call. Thomas and Eliza were at a post-wedding brunch with guests at the hotel where I was staying. They agreed to step away to meet me in a private conference room. I walked into the hotel with my head high, the envelope containing the documentation in my handbag. When I reached the conference room, I found not just Thomas and Eliza waiting, but Caroline and Richard Whitmore as well. Thomas looked slightly hungover, but smug, clearly assuming I wanted to apologize for leaving the reception early. "Mom," he said with the condescending tone he had adopted in recent years, "you missed the cake cutting. People were asking where you had gone." I doubted that very much. No one had noticed my presence, let alone my absence. "I needed some air," I said simply, taking a seat across from them. "Thank you for meeting with me." "Of course, Mrs. Stevens," Caroline said with her practiced society smile. "Is everything all right? You seem distressed. I wanted to speak with Thomas and Eliza privately, but since you are here, this concerns you as well," I said, removing the envelope from my bag. I slid the envelope across the table to Thomas. "What is this?" he asked, not reaching for it. "Documentation of changes I have made to my will, accounts, and property." Thomas frowned, but opened the envelope, scanning the first document with confusion. Then his expression changed as understanding dawned. His hands began to tremble as he flipped to the next page. "What is it, Thomas?" Eliza asked, peering over his shoulder. "She has removed me as her beneficiary," he said, his voice tight with shock. "From everything, and she is selling the house." "What?" Eliza grabbed the papers. "Can she do that?" "I most certainly can," I replied calmly. "Everything is legally mine to dispose of as I see fit." "But what about the education fund?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising. "That was for my future children, your grandchildren. The $72,000 I saved even during years when I could barely afford to feed us has been transferred to a foundation for single mothers seeking education," I explained. "I think they will appreciate it more than children who do not yet exist and may never need financial assistance given their father's success and their mother's family wealth." Caroline Whitmore cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Stevens, I understand you might be emotional after the wedding, but this seems like an extreme reaction." "This is not about emotion, Mrs. Whitmore," I replied. "This is about respect, boundaries, and natural consequences. Thomas has made it clear through his words and actions that he views me as an embarrassment, someone who deserves only leftovers. I am simply adjusting my behavior to align with that reality." Thomas's face had lost all color. "You cannot do this. What about everything I am entitled to?" The entitlement in his voice, the assumption that my lifetime of work and saving belonged to him by right, confirmed I was making the right decision. "You are entitled to exactly what you have given me, leftovers of your respect." Richard Whitmore, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "Mrs. Stevens, perhaps you are being hasty. Family disagreements happen, but cutting off your only son seems extreme for what was clearly just a bad joke at the reception. With all due respect, Mr. Whitmore, this is not about one comment. This is about years of increasingly disrespectful behavior, culminating in public humiliation. I raised Thomas better than this. Yesterday showed me I failed." "Mom," Thomas interjected, his tone suddenly placating. "I was just joking around. You know how wedding stress can make people say stupid things. I didn't mean anything by it." "A joke is only funny if everyone laughs," I said quietly. "I was not laughing, Thomas. I was hurting. And you knew that, but you did not care." "This is ridiculous," Eliza snapped. "Thomas has been nothing but generous with you. He sends you money every month. Money is not respect," I replied. "And Thomas stopped sending money 2 years ago, though he apparently has not shared that with you." Eliza turned to Thomas with surprise. He flushed red. "We had the wedding expenses," he muttered. "I was going to restart it after things settled down." I stood gathering my purse. "I should let you get back to your brunch guests. I have said what I came to say." "So that is it?" Thomas demanded, standing as well. 25 years of being your son, and you throw me away over one stupid comment. I am not throwing you away, Thomas. I am establishing boundaries that should have been set long ago. You are still my son. I will always love you, but I will no longer enable behavior that devalues me. Treat people like leftovers long enough, I added, looking directly at each of them, and eventually they will leave the table. I turned and walked out, aware of the whispers from wedding guests who had noticed our meeting. In the lobby, Thomas caught up to me, grabbing my arm. "Mom, wait," he pleaded, his arrogance replaced by panic. "We need to talk about this. You cannot just change everything without discussion. We can talk when you are ready to have a respectful conversation," I replied, gently removing his hand from my arm. "But the financial decisions are made. Focus on your marriage and career. You have no need of my modest assets." "It is not about the money," he insisted, though his earlier question about what he was entitled to suggested otherwise. "I truly hope that is true," I said, "because that is all that remains between us now. Not money, not obligation, but the possibility of a relationship based on genuine respect." I stepped into a waiting taxi, leaving Thomas standing in the hotel driveway, the documentation of his consequences still clutched in his shaking hand. The initial days after the wedding confrontation passed in a blur of activity. I returned to my home with new eyes, seeing not the comfortable nest I had maintained for Thomas's infrequent visits, but a house too large for one person, filled with memories that now carried a bitter edge. Thomas called multiple times daily, his messages shifting from angry demands to wounded pleas. I did not answer. Eliza sent a formal note on expensive stationery, apologizing for any misunderstanding, while suggesting I had misinterpreted harmless wedding banter. Caroline Whitmore sent an enormous flower arrangement with a card implying I was having some sort of menopausal episode. I donated the flowers to a nursing home. Working with a realtor, I listed my 3-bedroom suburban house priced to sell quickly. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 offers. I accepted one from a young family with 2 small children, finding comfort in the thought of the home being filled with the family energy it had been prepared for but rarely received. Meanwhile, I met with a financial advisor recommended by Harold. Laura Chen specialized in retirement planning for women and approached my situation with refreshing practicality. "You actually have more options than you realize," she told me after reviewing my finances. "Between your retirement savings, the profit from your home sale, and your current income, you could retire earlier than the traditional age if you downsize significantly." The idea of early retirement had never occurred to me. I had always assumed I would work until I physically could not, trying to accumulate enough to support myself in old age while leaving something for Thomas. Now, with only myself to consider, new possibilities emerged. "What would that look like?" I asked, curious rather than dismissive. Laura outlined several scenarios, from continuing to work while investing more aggressively to reducing my hours and supplementing with investment income. For the first time, I began to see my remaining years as an opportunity rather than an obligation. With the house under contract, I began the process of downsizing. Each item I sorted brought memories, some joyful, others painful in light of recent events. Thomas's childhood artwork, photo albums documenting his growth from toddler to young man, trophies and awards I had proudly displayed but he had never wanted to take to his own home. I packed these sentimental items carefully into boxes, not disposing of them, but not giving them prominence either. They were part of my history, but they would not dominate my future. Through Margaret, I learned about a support group for parents navigating difficult relationships with adult children. At my first meeting, I sat quietly listening to stories that echoed aspects of my own experience. Parents whose financial support was taken for granted. Children who had grown embarrassed by the very parents who had sacrificed everything for their success. The painful process of establishing boundaries after decades of giving. When I finally shared my story, the understanding nods around the circle brought unexpected comfort. I wasn't alone, and the steps I had taken, while difficult, were recognized as necessary by others who had walked similar paths. "You did the right thing," said Eleanor, a retired teacher whose daughter had exploited her financially for years. It hurts now, but healthy boundaries protect both sides of a relationship. As the weeks passed, I found myself reconnecting with old friends I had lost touch with during years of overwork and single parenting. Angela, my college roommate, who had tried to maintain contact despite my perpetual busyness. Robert, a kind widower from my office, who had invited me to dinner several times before I stopped accepting, too exhausted for socializing. Joanne, from my first waitressing job, now running her own successful restaurant. "Where have you been hiding?" Angela asked when we met for coffee. "I missed you." "I wasn't hiding," I replied after consideration. "I was just completely focused on Thomas. I didn't leave room for anything else." "Well, I am glad you are making room now," she said, squeezing my hand. "Better late than never." With the proceeds from my house sale, I purchased a small modern condo in a vibrant community with walking paths, community gardens, and regular social events. It had just enough space for me and occasional visitors, but no extra room dedicated to a son who never came. The relief of not maintaining a house and yard gave me back hours each week, time I now spent exploring interests long set aside. I enrolled in art classes at the community center, rediscovering a passion for painting. I had abandoned in my early 20s when parenthood took priority. I joined a walking group that met 3 mornings a week, improving my health while forming new friendships. I even began volunteering at a center for single parents, sharing practical skills from budgeting to basic home repairs. Through all these changes, Thomas's attempts to contact me continued, though their frequency decreased. After a month of silence on my part, a different message arrived. An actual letter, handwritten on quality stationery, delivered to my new address, which I had not provided to him. I opened it with trepidation, prepared for more manipulative tactics. Instead, I found something unexpected. "Dear Mom," it began. "I have spent weeks trying to understand what happened, looking at it from every angle, except perhaps yours. I kept thinking about what I was losing, what I was entitled to, how unfair it all seemed. Only recently did I start to consider what you have given, what you were entitled to, and how unfair I have been. Eliza and I are struggling. The financial pressure of the lifestyle we thought we deserved is crushing us. Her family's wealth isn't as accessible as I assumed, and my salary, while good, can't sustain our choices. We fight constantly about money. Last week she suggested I ask you for help with our credit card debt. When I pointed out that wasn't an option anymore, she actually said, just apologize or whatever she needs to hear. That was my wake-up call. I realized I had been thinking the same thing, that I just needed to say the right words to fix this. Not that I needed to actually understand or change. I've started seeing a therapist to work through why I treated you the way I did. I'm not writing to ask for money or forgiveness. I'm writing because I owe you an acknowledgement of the pain I caused. I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to understand." The letter was signed simply, Thomas. I sat with the letter for days, reading it multiple times, searching for manipulation, but finding only the beginning of awareness. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was a start. I decided not to respond immediately, giving both Thomas and myself time to process. 3 weeks later, I received another letter. This one went deeper, acknowledging specific incidents of disrespect over the years. Thomas wrote about remembering times when I had gone without so he could have what he needed. He expressed shame at how he had allowed Eliza and her family to treat me at the wedding, and deeper shame at his own cruelty. "I keep thinking about what you said about being treated like leftovers," he wrote. "I'm realizing now how many times I made you feel that way, not just at the wedding. You were right to establish boundaries. I wouldn't have learned otherwise." After the third letter, which included a genuine apology without excuses, I finally responded with a brief note. "Thomas, I appreciate your letters and the reflection they show. I would be willing to meet for coffee if you would like to talk in person." We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. When Thomas arrived, I barely recognized him. The polished, confident finance professional had been replaced by someone who looked tired, humbled, and genuinely nervous. "Mom," he said, his voice catching slightly. Thank you for meeting me. Thank you for your letters, I replied, keeping my tone gentle but neutral. We ordered coffee, the awkwardness between us palpable. Years of unaddressed issues and fresh wounds created a chasm that would take more than one conversation to bridge. I do not even know where to begin, Thomas admitted after our drinks arrived. How about with what you have been learning in therapy, I suggested. He nodded, looking relieved at the direction. A lot about validation seeking. I've been so focused on external markers of success, on impressing others, that I lost sight of the values you raised me with. The therapist helped me see how I've been using status to fill some emptiness I feel. And Eliza, I asked carefully. Thomas sighed. We're in couples counseling now. It's revealing a lot of issues we ignored during the wedding planning. She's struggling too with expectations from her family and the reality of our financial situation. For the next hour, we talked more openly than we had in years. There were difficult moments when Thomas had to confront his behavior directly, and I had to acknowledge the unhealthy patterns I had enabled. But there were also glimpses of the thoughtful boy I had raised, moments of genuine connection that gave me hope. I know I can't expect things to go back to the way they were, Thomas said as our meeting came to an end. And honestly, that's probably good. The way things were wasn't healthy for either of us. No, it wasn't, I agreed. But that doesn't mean we can't build something new, something better, if we're both willing to do the work. We agreed to meet again the following month, with no pressure or expectations, beyond continued honest conversation. As Thomas walked me to my car, he asked hesitantly about the education foundation I had established. Would it be possible for me to contribute to it, he asked. Not to undo what you've done, but because I think it's a worthy cause, supporting single parents like you were. For the first time since the wedding, I felt a genuine smile warm my face. I think that would be wonderful, Thomas. Our rebuilding process was slow and sometimes painful. We met monthly for coffee, gradually increasing the frequency as our comfort with each other grew. There were setbacks and difficult conversations, moments when old patterns threatened to re-emerge. But there was also genuine effort on both sides. After 6 months of consistent progress, Thomas asked if he could bring Eliza to our next meeting. I agreed with some trepidation. Eliza was not the polished, confident socialite I remembered from the wedding. She seemed nervous, less perfectly put together, more human. I owe you an apology, she said after an awkward greeting. I was horrible to you. There's no excuse for how I behaved or the things I said. Why? I asked simply. It wasn't accusatory, just a genuine question I had wondered about for months. Eliza looked surprised by the directness, but answered honestly. Insecurity mainly. My family has the appearance of wealth, but most of it was gone by the time it reached my generation. I was raised to maintain appearances at all costs. When Thomas and I met, I was desperate to marry someone who could support the lifestyle I'd been raised to expect. I saw you as a reminder of a financial reality I was trying to escape. Her honesty was unexpected and disarming. Over the next hour, the three of us had the kind of honest conversation that should have happened long before the wedding. Eliza spoke about the pressure from her parents to marry well. Thomas acknowledged how he had been complicit in the mistreatment, seeking the Whitmore's approval at my expense. We've downsized, Eliza shared as our conversation continued. Moved out of the expensive apartment into something we can actually afford. My parents were horrified, but it's been liberating. We're trying to build a life based on what matters to us, not what impresses others, Thomas added. It's hard breaking those habits, but it feels more authentic. As our relationship cautiously rebuilt, I continued developing my own life independent of Thomas. The Education Foundation grew as other donors contributed, allowing us to support more single parents each year. I found fulfillment in mentoring women facing the same challenges I had navigated decades earlier. My art classes led to a small exhibition at the community center where I sold several paintings. The surprise income was welcome, but the creative fulfillment was the true gift. I joined a travel group for seniors and took my first trip abroad at 58, visiting Italy with a newfound confidence in navigating the world alone. In my art class, I met Leonard, a retired high school art teacher whose kind humor and thoughtful perspective drew me in gradually. Our friendship evolved slowly into something deeper, my first serious relationship since Thomas's father. Leonard understood the importance of my independence and respected the boundaries I had learned to establish. "You're a revelation, Bonnie," he told me one evening as we walked along the community garden paths. "Most people never learn to reinvent themselves the way you have." 2 years after the wedding incident, Thomas and Eliza invited me to dinner at their modest new home. They had moved to a smaller city with a lower cost of living, where Thomas had taken a job with slightly less prestige but better work-life balance. "We have some news," Eliza said after dinner, exchanging a nervous glance with Thomas. "We're expecting," Thomas added. "You're going to be a grandmother." The joy I felt was uncomplicated, free from the expectations and obligations that had characterized our relationship in the past. I hugged them both, genuinely happy for this new chapter in their lives. "There's something else," Thomas said once we were seated again. "We've been talking about names if it's a girl. We'd like to name her Bonnie after you, if that's all right." Tears filled my eyes, but they were different from the tears I had shed in that hotel room 2 years ago. These were tears of healing, of recognition of love, freely given rather than obligation. "I would be honored," I said softly. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. A painful public humiliation had become the catalyst for change the moment when I finally recognized my own worth and demanded that others recognize it too. By standing up for myself when it was hardest, by refusing to accept leftovers of respect or affection, I had ultimately created the possibility for genuine relationship, not just with Thomas, but with myself. The woman who had spent decades putting herself last had finally learned that her dignity was not negotiable. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and others is to establish boundaries that honor our worth. Sometimes we need to leave the table where we're served leftovers to find the feast we deserve. 5 years after that painful wedding day, my life bears little resemblance to the one I lived for decades. I have a loving relationship with Leonard, who proposed last year with a simple sapphire ring that means more to me than any diamond could. I maintain a healthy, respectful relationship with Thomas, Eliza, and my 2 grandchildren based on genuine connection rather than obligation. The foundation for single parents has grown beyond what I ever imagined, now helping dozens of women annually with education costs and mentorship. My artwork sells consistently at local galleries, providing both creative fulfillment and supplemental income. I travel several times a year experiencing places I once only dreamed about. Most importantly, I have learned that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity, to establish healthy boundaries, and to create a life centered on your own well-being rather than someone else's approval. The painful lesson of being served cold leftovers became the catalyst for the most fulfilling years of my life. The most valuable wisdom I gained through this journey is the understanding that love without respect is not love at all. True love, whether between parent and child or between any 2 people, must include recognition of each person's inherent worth. Sacrifice becomes toxic when it erases the self. I often think about the trembling hands that held that envelope in the hotel conference room. The shock on Thomas's face when he realized there were consequences for his behavior. That moment of reckoning was necessary for both of us, painful as it was. Without it, we might never have found our way to the healthier relationship we enjoy today. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when everyone expected you to just take the scraps? What boundaries have you established that changed a relationship for the better or freed you from one that couldn't be saved? Share your story in the comments below, and let me know if standing up for yourself was as liberating for you as it was for me. Please hit the like button if my journey resonated with you, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding strength in unexpected moments. Share this video with someone who might need encouragement to value their own dignity. Thank you for listening, and remember you deserve a place at the table, not just the leftovers that remain after everyone else has been served.